Hey, what's up guys, it's Hedrymas here back with another video. Today I'm gonna be giving you guys an updated Shadow Piece guide since some things have changed a bit now that we have 2 Azerite traits on every piece, which allows us to make some interesting combinations that are really powerful. So first of all, let's go over the talents. This one is pretty easy since it doesn't really change except for in Mythic Plus. So for the first row you want to go for Shadow Word Void. This will basically replace your Mind Blast with Shadow Word Void, and instead of only having 1 stack you get 2 stacks. Next row, you have Body and Soul, Sun Lane, and Intangibility. Usually you want to go for Body and Soul since this is your only reliable movement speed cooldown. You also have Dispersion, which now also gives movement speed, but in general you don't really want to rely on your Dispersion, which is your only real defensive for movement speed if you can do it with just shields. The second talent is Sun Lane. This is not really used that much. It can be used in some situations. There is a few situations where maybe the raid damage is very high and the healers need a little bit of help and it's a fight where you don't have to move much, then this might actually be worth it. But in most situations you actually don't pick it since Body and Soul is so strong. Then you have Intangibility, which makes your Dispersion heal you for 50% of your maximum health over the duration, and it has a 30-second reduced cooldown. In general, I would always go for Body and Soul. Intangibility can be used in some cases, but for example, most fights you have to move somewhat, and if you can Body and Soul like this and get somewhere really fast, like now it's over but now I can stop, like if you can get places really fast with Body and Soul, it might actually be worth more than Intangibility. The next row you have Twist of Fate, Misery and Dark Void. In general you also always want to go for Twist of Fate. It gives you 10% increased damage and healing for 8 seconds when you hit a target below 35% HP. This is really handy for bosses, even with ads. If you have a boss with ads and you just dot the target and the target drops below 35% HP, you will do 10% more damage to every single mob you attack, including the boss. Then you have Misery. Misery is only really used in Mythic Plus together with Dark Void. Dark Void will basically apply Shadow Word Pain to all the enemies in a certain radius, while Misery will apply both Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch when you apply Vampiric Touch. This is kind of depending on your group setup, the dungeon, and actually what you prefer to play really. Because with Reaping, Dark Void is actually really strong since you can get Shadow Word Pain on all the mobs. But if you have some really good AoE classes, then Misery might actually be better, especially for example on hierarchies. If you just like have a pack of 5 mobs, you can with Misery you can multi-dot all of them really quickly. So it kind of depends on personal preference and situation. But in general you always go for Twist of Fate, except for Mythic Plus. The next trait is Last Words, Mind Bomb and Psychic Horror. Last Word reduces the cooldown of silence by 15 seconds. Mind Bomb basically gives an AoE stun. It's actually a disorient, but it just stops everything in a certain radius from doing whatever they were doing. Then Psychic Horror is an actual stun on one target for 4 seconds. There is not really a go-to here. In dungeons I would usually go for Mind Bomb, but then you have dungeons like what's it called again, actually I completely forgot. Dungeons like Waker's Manor where Last Word might actually be needed for the boss where there's 3 bosses, since the more interrupts you have there the better. And then Psychic Horror, for example, we use on Mythic Jaina because we stun the mob that is doing the casting the barrel and putting the barrel on the boat, because if you stun him he stops doing it, plus he doesn't do it for another 30 seconds or something. So the next row has Auspicious Spirit, Shadow Word Death and Shadow Crash. In general, you always want to go for Auspicious Spirits. It will give you the most damage, plus it gives Insanity every time you hit an enemy with a Shadowy Apparition, which is really nice, especially on AoE, because you actually get a decent amount of Insanity back. Shadow Crash can be used in Mythic Plus, but generally I don't use it. I don't think a lot of Shadow Priests actually use this in Mythic Plus, especially not since the new Azerite gear and our higher item level. The next row is Lingering Insanity, Mindbender and Void Torrent. In general, always go for Lingering Insanity. With our higher item level, we actually get more haste as well, which makes our Lingering Insanity even stronger. We get to more stacks, I mean, so Lingering Insanity is stronger. Also, they buffed Lingering Insanity, making it go down in haste slower than before. Now, the last row, you have Legacy of the Void, Dark Ascension, Surrender to Madness. In general, you always want to go for Legacy of the Void. Usually after you go out of Void form you will be back in Void form very quickly, which makes Dark Ascension kind of worthless. It's not completely worthless, it's just not as strong as it used to be. And also you get the 5% extra spell damage in Void form from Legacy of the Void, which is very, very strong because you pretty much have this up all the time. Now for the stats you want to go for, everywhere you see that you want Haste, Crit, Int, Mastery, Versatility, these are generally correct, but these will change around depending on your item level and your Azerite pieces. For me, my stat priority is Haste, Crit, Versatility, Mastery, and then Intellect. So as you can see, Intellect is actually my worst stat out of all the stats. This will change around a lot depending on which Azerite traits you have. So if you get some new pieces of gear, you should sim yourself because there's a lot of factors that matter here. Now for the Azerite traits, for these you don't really want to be looking at Blood Mallet. That's mainly because some traits have interactions with other traits which makes them way stronger. So the best trait you want to go for is Chorus of Insanity. This is pretty much going to give you a ton of crit when you leave Void form. If you have 3 of these for example and you get to 25 stacks of Void form, you're going to get 2475 crit, which will decay every second by 99. So you have insane amounts of crit when you go out of Void form. So imagine you're on AoE, 5 mobs, then you go out of Void form, you have 60% crit, then you see a ton of shadowy apparitions go to the mobs, and then because of Auspicious Spirit, you actually get a decent amount of insanity as well, which is really nice. So this brings me to my next Azerite trait, which has real good synergy with this. This is Spiteful Apparitions. This is going to make your apparitions do extra damage if the target has Vampiric Touch on them, which gets really high if you stack this. For me, my apparitions hit for about 12k I would say, and I have 2 of them. So this is very, very strong. And now if you don't have any of these traits, I suggest checking Blood Mallet for the damage values of the generic traits. Another trait that's actually really good is Death Throes, for example. It might on Blood Mallet say that it doesn't do as much damage as other traits, but a lot of fights are multi-dot and this is actually really strong. So all the traits I just discussed are mainly for raids and single target. For Mythic Plus and AoE it changes somewhat. So the main trait you want to go for on AoE is Death Throes. You want to get 3 of these, since this will increase your cleave and AoE damage by a lot. Besides the extra damage, you also gain Insanity when mobs affected by your Shadow Word Pain die. So this is really nice, for example when a pack is about to die, since you have less ramp up for the next pack. So that's great. The second trait you want to go for is Thought Harvester. This is going to increase your Vampiric Dodge damage, which isn't really important. The thing that is important, however, is that Vampiric Dodge has a chance to make your next Mindseer do 150% extra damage if your Mindseer within 20 seconds, which is the duration of the proc. So you only want to get 1 of these traits, since having more than 1 increases only your Vampiric Dodge damage, and there's way better alternatives to that. The last 2 traits you want to go for is Searing Dialogue. This pretty much increases your Mindseer damage if mobs are affected by your Shadow Word Pain, which they should be. By itself this is already strong, but the best thing is that this trait works with Thought Harvester, which pretty much means that you will be doing really insane Mindseers when it procs. If you don't have any of these traits, then you can always go for other Shadow Priest traits, since they're all also very strong traits. So generally you want to go for the traits you see on screen now for the different situations. But of course these traits and combinations will change depending on the situation and the simulations. This list is generally for when you have them all on the same item level. It is important to note that depending on your traits, your stat priority can change significantly, so don't forget to simulate your character when equipping new pieces. Now let's get into the rotation. First I'll go over single targets and then I'll go over AoE, and after that I'll go over a few unique cases with different Azerite traits. In general, what you want to do on single target is just keep your dots up, use Void Bolt on cooldown, and generate and fill with Shadow Word Void and Mind Flay. So you'll play it like I'm doing now. This is with the wrong opener by the way, I'm just showing you the rotation itself. I'm not going to use my cooldown either, I'll explain that when I explain the opener. So as you can see here, I had my Shadow Word Void up before I had my Void Bolt up. But because my Shadow Word Void has 2 stacks and is gonna tick for the second stack, it's actually better to wait a tiny bit for Void Bolt and then cast your Shadow Word Void. This is mainly because if you would cast Shadow Word Void first and then do Void Bolt, that would mean that you would actually lose out on some damage. Since you don't have 2 stacks of Void Bolt, but you do have 2 stacks of Shadow Word Void. So you can see the rotation is really simple on single target. Also, the reason why the dots don't seem to fall off is because when you use Void Bolt, you actually refresh. You don't refresh, you increase the duration of all the dots on the enemy and around the enemy by a few seconds. So as you can see, I now actually have a lot of crit, 54% decaying by like 1 to 2% every second. Which also means if you get back into Void form really quickly, you will actually do significant amount of damage, especially on AoE with your Void, void Eruption. Now, if you have to move during single target damage, I typically shield myself to get where I have to be faster. I also use Void Bolt on cooldown and I spam Shadow or Pain for more insanity and damage. It's also possible to shield raid members since this generates 6 insanity each, plus it gives them movement speed and health too, which is really nice, especially on hard fights. So for example, if I would have to move here, I'm gonna shield this guy. So you actually have a decent amount of movement. Also, if there is multiple mobs, of course you're going to be using Shadow or Pain on multiple mobs. You don't need to keep refreshing it on the same mob. Now let's get into the AoE rotation. On AoE, you basically want to keep all your dots up and spam Void Bolt, because Void Bolt will increase the duration of all your dots on all the enemies, which is really nice. You will be casting Shadow or Void on up to 3 targets. That is if you don't have any AoE traits, such as the Mindseer one. So on 3 mobs, you will just be doing your single target rotation, but you will keeping up your dots on all the mobs. Now, if you get to 4 targets, instead of using your Shadow or Void, you will always be casting Mindseer. Also, you want to be using Mindseer on 3 mobs or more. So, for example, let's first show the rotation on 2 mobs. So, there's 2 mobs here, we dot them up. And then, basically, we do the normal rotation and we make sure we keep the dots up. Of course, these 2 are actually spread out, so we're gonna have to keep reapplying dots on one of them, while on the other one we can do a single target rotation. Also, you can see my shadowy apparition hits for 10k, and that is without the buff from, what's it called, from mages. So that's actually really insane. It's gonna hit for like 16k or something if you have 3 of these traits, so that's really strong. So this is 2 mobs, basically just single target rotation. Now I'm gonna show 3 mobs. You keep the dots up on 3 targets. Note that I have no AoE traits equipped right now, so this is a bit different. So you want to be casting Mindseer as a filler, and you still want to be casting Shadow or Void. So the single target rotation stays the exact same, with the difference that you replace Mindseer with, you replace Mind Flayer with Mindseer. Now if you get to 4 mobs, then we will actually stop using our Shadow or Void and we will just be casting Mindseer as a filler. As you can see, I'm actually generating a lot of insanity from my apparitions. And that's also because I just came out of Void form, so I had a lot of crit. The great thing about Shadow Priest is on a lot of targets, once you have them dotted up, you can keep up the dots pretty long with Void Bolt. Now you're gonna see a lot of crits because I just came out of Void form. Look at how many apparitions I have. It's actually insane. And now Void Eruption, and it's gonna crit a ton, yeah. It's actually really nice. It's so satisfying to see all of them flying towards it. So anyway, on 5 to 10 targets, you actually do the exact same as before. So basically, 1 to 2 targets is single target rotation pretty much, with dots keeping them up. 3 targets is also the same, except that you will cast Mindseer as a filler instead of Mind Flay if you have nothing else to cast. Then once you get to 4 targets to 10 targets, the rotation is pretty much keep your dots up, use Void Bolt on cooldown, and then you Mindseer away. Then on 10 targets or more, on a lot of places it actually says that you should not dot the mobs at all. But in general, you should be dotting the strong mobs. Plus, if you have good traits, then you will actually gain a lot of damage by dotting them. instead of just casting Mindseer. Especially, for example, if you have, where is it? No, not this one. Oh, I have so many Azerite pieces. I don't know. Okay, especially if you have Searing Dialogue, then actually dotting the mobs is gonna make a big difference. And also, if you have Searing Dialogue here, oh, not this one. No, Thought. I keep mixing them up. If you have Thought Harvester, then 150% damage plus the extra damage from Mindseer is actually gonna be insane. Now for the specific situations with Azerite traits, your rotation changes mainly depending on your Searing Dialogue traits and if you have a Thought Harvester trait. When you have 1 or 2 Searing Dialogue traits and on single target with 1 Thought Harvester, you can use Mindseer when your Thought Harvester procs. If you have 3 of the Searing Dialogue traits, you can completely swap your Mindflay for Mindseer. Do note that you will not generate as much Insanity as you would with Mindflay, so on higher stacks this might actually knock you out of Void Form. This means that if for some reason you want to time when you get out of Void Form to do more burst, you should be changing between Mindseer and Mindflay depending on the situation. Now on AoE, if you have 1 Mindseer trait without Thought Harvester, you want to be swapping your Shadow Word Void with Mindseer at 3 targets. If you have 2 or more, then you should be dropping your Shadow Word Void at 2 targets even. Now let's go over the opener and cooldowns. For your Shadow Fiend, you generally want to be using it as soon as possible when it's off cooldown, since you don't want to miss out on any usage of it. But in situations such as Mythic Jaina, where you need it for specific phases and have to delay it, you can choose a bit more when you want to use it. In general, you want to use it so that it fades just when your Void Form fades, so this can depend upon your gear a lot. I can pop it at 15 stacks sometimes, but for most people this should be popped at 5 to 10 stacks. If you however pop it a bit later, it's not too bad since you usually will have very high amounts of crit from your Chorus of Insanity Azerite traits, so if you drop out of Void Form before it fades, then it's not the end of the world. Now for the opener there is 2 situations. One is if you get enough time before pull, and one is if you only get a few seconds before pull. I'll start with the easiest one first. For the first one, you will precast Shadow Word Void. Then you apply Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, and then you do your normal fillers until you can get into Void Form, and then you do your normal rotation. Seems to be lagging a little bit. But yeah, the normal opener is pretty easy. Now we actually need to drop out of Void Form to show you my next example. Now for the one where you can prepare, you need to get to 60 Insanity before the pull. The way I do it is by shielding 6 people first, eating Feast, and then shielding 6 more people. We don't have a Feast here, so let's start shielding people already. You can do this way before pull. You just need to make sure you sometimes refresh a random Shadow Word Shield. Not Shadow Word Shield. What is it called? I actually don't have the name because okay, your Power Word Shield. You want to just cast one every so often before the pull, if it takes a long time, because if you don't, your Insanity will start to drain. So once we get to 60 Insanity, I'll show you the opener. So then when the pull timer hits 3, you're gonna pop your potion and you'll instantly cast Void Eruption. So make sure that you stand far enough so that your Void Eruption has some travel time. Let's do a pull timer of 10 seconds and hope it doesn't freeze, okay.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So as you can see, the fight had technically not even started yet, and I already had my Void Eruption up. So usually when you start a fight with more than 20 Insanity, the game is going to put your Insanity on 20. But since we get into Void Form before we even engage in a fight, we can start the fight in Void Form, which gives us a big edge. So after you pulled, you can just continue your normal rotation, but with more opener damage than usual. Also, you're going to lose less potion usage, since generally your potion won't help much if you have to get into Void Form first when the fight even starts. So anyway, that was in general it. I have one more note that I was thinking of while I was making this video, and that is when you have Twist of Fate, you want to make sure that you proc it even if it's on a mob that you don't have to damage, as in like the mob doesn't have to die. So for example, let's say this is a mob that shouldn't die, like all the damage on it is useless, but if it dies it's whatever. You can pop your Shadow Word Pain on it, because it will give you Insanity from Auspicious Spirits, Plus, it will actually proc your Twist of Fate and it lasts for 8 seconds. So when he drops below 35%, you will actually just do 10% more single target damage, which is actually worth if you only have to reapply your Shadow Word Pain. Anyway, that was it for the guide. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments and I'll answer you as soon as I can. But anyway, thanks for watching and I'll hope to see you in the next one.